Hello and welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Devin Nakuna, joined alongside by Daniel Davis. On the show today is Brooke Hauser, author of The New Kids, Big Dreams and Brave Journeys at a High School for Immigrant Teens. The book is centered around Hauser's time spent at Brooklyn's International High School, where English is taught to immigrants who recently arrived from various parts of the world. It is a heartwarming, humorous, and inspirational glimpse at the unique lives of these immigrants. Thanks for being on the show today, Brooke.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you again, Brooke.
Thank you.
Now, Brooke, I was just wondering if you could give us a little background behind writing The New Kids.
Sure. Well, it actually started off as an article that I wrote for the New York Times called This Strange Thing Called Prom. And the idea of the article was that here's this high school, the International High School at Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, where students come from more than 45 different countries and speak more than 28 different languages. But they're really brand new to the United States and to many traditional high school rituals. So when I met the kids for the first time, they had never heard of prom. They had no idea what it was. It was a foreign concept. And I thought that would be a really fun piece for the New York Times. So I wrote about the kids learning about prom, much in the same way that I would have studied for a chemistry exam. They would rent teen movies like Mean Girls and, figure out, okay, a prom.
Mean Girls, really?
Yeah.
I would have thought of something like, Peggy Sue Got Married, but My Girl? Ooh, okay, anyway,
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe they got kind of a not-so-glamorous view
I
of
can
prom.
imagine.
Like, a prom is really awful. No, and Prom Night, a horror
Back to
movie
the
was
Future
out.
there or something, yeah.
Yeah, Prom Night, the horror movie was out, and they were...
There you go.
So, but they were just trying to figure out, okay, a prom has a prom king and a prom queen, and, this is the way we're going to do it a little differently. And
Guess it's a good thing it wasn't Carrie.
Exactly. Yeah. In the end, their prom was unlike any other prom I'd ever heard of. The most popular girl was a nomadic yak herder from Tibet. Yeah, but that's how I really got to know the school at first. And, the article was fun and lighthearted, and the school responded to it, and I think it helped me earn their trust. So when I asked to go back for a full year to write about the students, they were open to me returning, and that's how I came back to write the book.
And Brooke, one of the things that stuck out to me was how you were able to convey the stories of each student from all these different backgrounds and cultures. So what was your strategy for interviewing the students, and how long did the process take?
Well, I found this. I basically follow about 5 students, and the girl who I opened the book with is from, well, she said she's from Burma/Myanmar, and I met her on her first day of school. She actually came a few days late, and I knew that I wanted to follow a new kid, someone who had literally just landed in the United States. She'd only been here for a couple of months. She was the only person in the entire school who spoke her language, Burmese. And in fact, when she first got here, her teachers couldn't even figure out where she came from, because when they asked her where she was from, sometimes she said Burma and sometimes she said Thailand. And the reason she said Thailand is because she had lived there in a refugee camp for a few years. So that was how I found her. And as far as, the technique to interviewing her, well, I didn't interview her, you could say, because I don't speak Burmese and she doesn't speak English. So if anything, I just shadowed her, and I spent a lot of time with her those first few days, going with her from the class to the cafeteria. And much later in the year, she was able to articulate to me in the English she had learned what it felt like for her on that first day. The other kids I found by either reading their college essays, which really divulged some of their personal stories and journeys to the United States. I also found kids by asking the 12th grade teachers a question, and the question was, when you go home at night, who are the students who you can't stop thinking about? And I really was led to some of the students who I ended up following by their teachers.
Now, Brooke, it's interesting because you were just talking about Cheat Sue, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for the listeners out there about Burma, and I don't know that she is actually from the area, but there's an incredible, or has been an incredible genocide that's been going on over there.
Right.
And to have this young girl come to the United States, you can imagine what a tremendous culture shock that must be to come from a land of such terror, if you will, to something that may even be a little more terrible just because you can't talk to anybody.
Right. No, I felt for her because, like you said, she couldn't talk to anybody. And, you know, I still, she ended up moving away, and I still feel like I never really got to know her very well. And at one point I did find a Burmese translator who did some work with the United Nations, and this woman helped me talk to Chitsu in her native language. But even still, there were so many holes left. And I feel that that's an accurate portrayal of the school in some ways, because most of the kids, the teachers get a really good sense of, you know, they learn a ton about them while they're there and are able to really help them. But there are a few kids who come and are just, you know, because of circumstances, unable to stay for the full 4 years. And so there are a lot of kids who arrive mysteries and leave mysteries, depending on how long they're able to actually stay in the school.
And you know, all these stories about the kids were so fascinating. But one of the ones that really struck out to me was Muhammad. I believe he was from Sierra Leone, and he lived with his mother in a mud house before winning a contest and moving to America. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little more about Muhammad.
Yeah, Muhammad's a great kid, and as you pointed out, he was born in a small rural village in Sierra Leone and grew up with his mom in a mud brick hut with no electricity or running water. He was also one of more than 20 children that his father had with various wives. So, you know, and he wasn't ever recruited. People have asked me if he was in the war or recruited as a child soldier. And no, he never was, but the war came through his village, and he wrote an essay once about the day that a child soldier came to his home and held his family by gunpoint and basically robbed them. And so, you know, he had survived some very difficult hardship in Sierra Leone, and then eventually made his way to Freetown, the capital, where he got an education at a school that was supported by a church in Farmington, Connecticut. And I don't want to give away the whole story, but as you pointed out, he won a contest that basically gave him passage to the United States to live in Connecticut for a few weeks. And what happens after that, you'll have to read the book, but he ended up in New York City, and basically his story is a convoluted one with a lot of twists and turns, you could say.
I think what really makes what you have here fascinating is it gives Americans an insight of two things. How, and I don't know that they mean to, that American children or teenagers take advantage of the free education system that they have, so they tend to spend a lot of time on socialization rather than homework. Now, this is a situation, you've got 45 countries, 28 different languages. You don't tend to see the same kind of socialization as you described throughout the book, such as cliques, you know, the jocks, the nerds, you know, those kinds of things that are celebrated in American television. That must have made for a really interesting potpourri for you to draw from, because it lends a lot of character to the book that you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite scenes to write took place in a cafeteria, and I noticed...
No, not the cafeteria.
Yeah, and actually, when I mentioned Mean Girls before, I kind of got the idea from Mean Girls, because I remember in the movie that they introduced all the different cliques, and right. I remember looking for those cliques at this high school, but finding really different ones. And so, let's say in the movie Mean Girls, yeah, you have the Mean Girls, right? Well, in this high school, you have the, the nomadic yak herders from Tibet. And you have a whole group of boys from Yemen who call themselves the Arabic family. And you have, really these odd groups. There was a group of Chinese boys who all wanted to be professional hair designers, which is a profession that I've never heard of before. But they would come to school with their hair, feathered and coiffed and mohawks and faux hawks, and it was just, there was so much life and liveliness and fun happening in the cafeteria. There were rival rap groups from Haiti and the Dominican Republic who were always drowning each other out. So for me, that was just like, it felt like
so much for the Nike Air.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun to be surrounded by those kids.
I was kind of thinking that same question that Dan just asked because, you know, like he said, at most high schools.
Because Devin's in a clique.
No.
He's part of the Filipino stick dancing group, is what
there
it
you
is.
go.
I was kind of a drifter. I like drifting.
The Pacquiao posse.
You were a metaphorical nomad, not in high school.
But I would have thought because it's an international school, a lot of these kids would be able to relate to each other, so there wouldn't be as much cliques. But I guess they sort of just, you know, the cliques just kind of formed, I guess, really?
Yeah, I would say that in the classes, the kids are really mixed together. So no matter what their ethnicity, their religion, their academic background, the kids are really just thrown into class together. So they definitely integrate and mix together in classes all day long. But given to their own devices during lunch, I think part of the reason they separate into cliques, according to ethnicity sometimes, is because, you know, they're learning English, and it takes so much mental power and exertion to learn a new language. And probably during lunch they just want to relax and, you know, if they're from Mexico, speak Spanish with the Mexican student, or, you know, French with a Senegalese you know, I think it's just a way for them to relax. So, you know, certainly there are kids who mingle socially outside of classes as well. There's a lot of interracial dating. There's a lot of friendships that are formed. There was a friendship formed between a girl from Yemen and a girl from China who were so different in their backgrounds, but really just had a lot in common in terms of their interests and their aspirations. So there are tons of connections made too.
Now, Brooke, you bring up the girl you were just mentioning, Yasmin, I believe was her name.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was really interesting because what stood out for me is you take a look, and this is one of those cultural rifts that comes in where it could leave, say, an American student scratching his head, and that is the ideal of marriage and how they deal with marriage in their country.
Mm-hmm.
But then you gave some astounding statistics about what it is to marry first cousins, that's something that's common, that in the United States, in something like 28 states, this is actually something that's legal. You can actually marry your first cousin, and that was something I didn't know. And the other thing is more than 20% of the marriages worldwide are to first cousins. And I was like, well, okay.
Yeah.
But I just found that to be one of those things that came out. It was during, a point where you were talking about, for instance, one of those things they talk about in high school, which is sexuality.
Right.
And boy, there's a whole bag of nuts right there that you wouldn't think of as an American student.
That's right. And I remember those statistics came up. I didn't find them. They were found by one of the administrators who sat down with this girl who, during her senior year of high school, found herself in a very difficult position. Both of her parents had recently died. She was suddenly in charge of her younger siblings, and she was considering whether or not to marry her first cousin in order to better care for her siblings and become their guardian. So I remember her being in the office of this administrator and, hearing the story. And, yes, they started looking up more information about cousins marrying cousins because, of course, there's sex ed classes at this school, and they talk about safe sex and stuff like that, but no one addresses cousins marrying cousins. And so this was something that they decided to look into on their own. And certainly it's a big taboo, I think, in this country. And, this girl herself, I think, had confused feelings about it, so it was difficult.
Unless you're from the South.
Well.
Kidding. Devin, do you think your first cousin is attractive?
Oh, no. That doesn't cross my mind.
But, my great-grandparents were first cousins, and so, it's kind of interesting. Like, in my own family, there's a little bit of that, and so, you don't hear about it much anymore, but I think in Yemen, amid this community, it wasn't that strange. But it was strange to a lot of her classmates, so I think she didn't quite know how to handle that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of makes you take a look, too, about how our belief systems are built, too, as well, when you think about, the socialism of growing up.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, certainly, a lot of the kids are dealing with cultural expectations and differences that just really vary from community to community. There were also, several West African girls who were married, a couple of them to West African taxi drivers, and they had babies. And for them, this isn't like teen mom, it wasn't a mistake. I don't know that it was planned exactly, but it certainly wasn't taboo in that culture, because chances are if they had stayed in Guinea or Sierra Leone, they would have had children at this age or earlier. So there were a lot of issues, different sets of beliefs and customs and traditions that the students had to deal with, but also that their teachers had to learn how to navigate.
Mm.
And Brooke, I think one of the other fascinating things about this is how the teachers try to involve themselves in the students' lives. I remember for me, in grade school and sometimes in high school, the teachers I kind of developed bonds with were usually the classes I really did good in.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think in the book, I think one of the teachers invited the students into her home. So in situations where teachers try to involve themselves more in the students' lives, it's something I think more teachers should try to do, and it shouldn't just happen at international schools.
No, that's a good point, and I think that it does happen at many other schools and that teachers don't always get the credit for it. But in the case that you mentioned, this is the boy from Sierra Leone. Yes, he did end up living with his former art teacher, and she became his legal guardian. So that's an unusual situation, and the fact is the kids in the school, many of them are in unusual situations. I was astonished by how many kids came to America by themselves, without parents, without relatives, or maybe they came here with someone but, have been separated since. And I certainly met a few kids who were living on their own. So they need more support than anyone, I think, from the staff at the school, which functions almost as a second home.
Wow.
Mm. And also, did it seem like, did these students get along with each other more because they're all from different backgrounds and stuff, so they can be more open-minded rather than just rather than like at like a regular high school where you have your already established groups?
Mhm. It depended. They're still teenagers, and teenagers are always a little bit impossible, I think.
Right.
So,
Uh-huh.
I think that the students supported each other in that they were all in this, even though they came from such different backgrounds, they were all in the same boat in that in order to enroll in the school, you have to have lived in the United States for fewer than 4 years, and you have to have failed an English language assessment exam. So all of the kids were brand new to the country, and all of the kids were learning English for the first time. And I think, I was talking to someone the other day about bullying. We hear and read so much about bullying now. It's even like, I think, a subplot on Glee. But one thing you never hear about is the bullying of immigrant students. And I think it's because, they're learning English. Their parents may not speak English. And so, some of the kids that I met had come from a middle school experience that was really difficult. Like the girl from Yemen in middle school, her classmates called her the Taliban for wearing her headscarf and asked her how young they married off child brides in her country. And she dropped out of middle school.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of bullying that I just think you never would hear about. So the kids are nicer to each other in that way at the school. You really don't hear kids making fun of each other's accents or making fun of each other's clothes if they're wearing like their native dress, for instance. But they find a million other reasons to make fun.
You're a yak herder.
Right. Some of the teachers made fun of that good-naturedly. but so there's that. But then there were certain ethnic tensions too. There was tension between some of the Chinese and Tibetan students, for instance. I remember one day a flyer was passed out advertising a meeting of the Tibetan Club, and a group of Chinese boys got a hold of it and crossed it out and said, don't go to Tibetan Club, come to Chinese Club first, because Tibet is actually inside of China. And that really pissed off all the Tibetans. So, there are these little battles that happen.
Oh my goodness! Oh, yeah. Saying that you're from China as a Tibetan, yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Brooke, it was interesting as I was reading through your book, because I grew up in Southern California. Mostly attended grade schools in places like San Pedro and Wilmington, and we had a fairly rich cultural student body. It was mostly Hispanic. There were whites, there were blacks, there were Chinese, Japanese, you name it. The gamut was there.
Right.
And I really felt like, for instance, this girl from Yemen, because I remember even I honestly at times participated in, what we would call them spics, the people who would cross the border and take advantage of America. Mm-hmm. And I would see at lunchtime, the free lunchtime program, and even at breakfast, as the kids would be throwing away, for instance, the vegetables that would be in the plastic bags, the mothers that would be well-dressed there pulling the stuff out of the garbage. But then something shifted in me, and I thought, for most of these families, this really is where their food source is coming from to feed the family. So I shifted from that, as a grade schooler. So when you talk about bullying, I truly understood that.
Yeah.
Now, as I shifted and we actually moved to the Northwest, I went into middle school and high school where it was mostly white people. And that bullying, exactly like what you're talking about with the mean girls, I was like, this is a lot of nonsense, And so that was one that really pulled at my heartstrings as I was reading through the book about, how these children, and some of them, as you said, they came to the United States completely alone. Mm-hmm. You would really have to be somebody of real strong character to get through that kind of nonsense to even hopefully prosper toward the American dream.
Absolutely. And it's true. I mean, the kids who have made it here are of strong character. The ones who have come alone, I think especially. I mean, what Muhammad had to get through to get to where he is today is remarkable. And he did, everything basically at the age of 14. The kids are so young when they get here, and I just, at the age of 14, I was so sheltered and coddled by my parents that, seeing what these kids have gone through to come to the United States, it really makes me realize that I've taken for granted even just being born in this country and how lucky that makes me.
Mm-hmm. Here with Brooke Hauser, author of The New Kids. Now, Brooke, what did you take away from this experience, and do you still keep in contact with the kids you did your research on?
Yeah, well, what I took away is exactly what I just said. I think that I, am more aware than ever how fortunate I am to have been born in America. I mean, people have a lot of problems with our country right now. Americans do, with the economy and the politics, and there's a million things to complain about, I suppose, but ultimately, life is easier here for some than it is in the countries where these kids are coming from. I don't want to make a generalization and say it's easier for everybody, but things like having clean water, you can turn on your faucet and get a clean drink of water. A lot of these kids coming from Sierra Leone and Haiti, they can't. They turn on their water and sludge comes out, if anything, or they have to walk miles to a well. Just really simple things that we take for granted. I've started not to take for granted anymore.
And the other thing, too, Brooke, when you consider in American schools, another thing that I think a lot of students take for granted is that if your parents can't afford to send you with a sack lunch or buy into the lunch program, generally speaking, in most public schools, you can participate in a low-cost or free lunch program. Try doing that in other countries.
Try going to school in other countries.
Exactly.
I mean, some of these kids didn't even have the option of going to school. Free lunch would have been, if they'd gone to school, maybe they would. It's just incredible to me. I mean, the opportunities that are here, and to see it through their eyes, it really makes you pay attention. And as far as the question about whether I've kept in touch with students, I have. They've come to some of the events for the book, like the book party and lunch and different talks I've done. And then, of course, I'm on Facebook and they're on Facebook, so we keep up that way too. And it's fun seeing how they're doing and where they're going, and they're going to some pretty exciting places.
Brooke, I was just thinking as we were talking earlier about bullying, about an interesting community service that should occur if the cost was essential enough, is to take the bullies through all of the high schools, whatever those cliques are, and throw them in other countries by themselves, like what these kids have dealt with.
Yeah.
And boy, I'll tell you what, you would definitely see some bullying cliques that are going to say, well, no, we're not going to tolerate this nonsense anymore.
Right. It takes a lot of guts to walk into a new country, a new city, a new high school, and say, I'm here.
The other thing, too, that's really interesting that would, and we see this in some schools here in the Northwest is, and I know Devin's probably experienced it being in Chicago, is that, when you typically go to an American high school, it's all about how they dress. Are you wearing the latest fashions? If you're not, then you're a dirtbag that probably the parents are broke and they can't afford the ice cream truck, as Eddie Murphy would say. But here you get a nice array of colors and, to me, that would be more fun than the nonsense of, do you have the latest, Levi or Jordache jeans, for instance.
Yeah, the kids have great outfits at the school. I mean, they do sometimes get more Americanized as the years progress, but some of them don't. I mean, you see girls from Bangladesh and Yemen and Pakistan, some of the Muslim girls wearing, beautiful fabrics, and there's a style of dress called a shalwar kameez, which is kind of a two-piece outfit, with beautiful fabrics and gorgeous colors, and some of these girls, they just look so pretty when they show up, and then some of the African girls, they tend to wear more Americanized clothes during the week, but if there's a special meeting of the African club, they might come out in, some of their bold Senegalese prints and head wraps, and it's, it is full of color. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Well, Brooke, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Is there a website where listeners can get more information about the book?
Yes, there is. My website is www.brookehauser.com, and then the book is on Amazon, so you can find everything there too.
Well, thanks again, Brooke. Listeners, please remember to visit our website at www.beyond50radio.com and sign up for a free weekly e-newsletter. Brooke, thank you for being on the show today. It was a pleasure having you.
Yes, it was, Brooke. Very big. Very enjoyable book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it. Take care.
You bet you. Take care.
Bye.